Hello and welcome to Quiz Class. I'm your host, Ellen, and today we have 100 questions on the 1950s. Let's take a look at our Quiz Class awards. Let us know how you rank in the comments at the end, along with the answer to the bonus question. Which country was Charlie Chaplin forced to leave in 1952? The United States, England, or France? The United States. Which country boycotted the 1956 Olympics due to the Soviet invasion of Hungary? Canada, Norway, or the Netherlands? The Netherlands. Who sang Rock Around the Clock in 1954 and ignited the rock and roll era? Bill Haley, Elvis Presley, or Chuck Berry? Bill Haley. What was the name of the first human-made object to reach the moon's surface in 1959? Surveyor 1, Luna 2, or Ranger 4? Luna 2. What was the name of the 1950s luxury sleeper train running from New York to Miami? Sunshine Special, Blue Comet, or Silver Meteor? Silver Meteor. Which 1953 magazine was originally marketed as Entertainment for Men? Playboy, Esquire, or GQ? Playboy. What bathroom product was advertised with the line, "It floats"? Camay, Ivory Soap, or Lifebuoy? Ivory Soap. Which 1959 fictional novel by Robert Heinlein went against war and military service? Starship Troopers, Starman Jones, or Tunnel in the Sky? Starship Troopers. Which animated TV character debuted in 1958 and was known for saying, "Hey Boo Boo"? Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, or Top Cat? Yogi Bear. Which colorful comic strip character first appeared in American newspapers in 1951? Archie Andrews, Beetle Bailey, or Dennis the Menace? Dennis the Menace. Which American city hosted the world's first major rock and roll concert in 1952? Cleveland, New York, or Los Angeles? Cleveland. Which country hosted the 1956 Summer Olympics? Italy, Canada, or Australia? Australia. Which pact was signed in 1955 and formed a military alliance of communist nations? The Warsaw Pact, the Geneva Accords, or the Atlantic Charter? The Warsaw Pact. Which 1950s entertainer became known as the Queen of Rockabilly? Patsy Cline, Wanda Jackson, or Brenda Lee? Wanda Jackson. Which Italian actress became a star during the 50s after winning the Miss Rome Beauty Contest in 1948? Anna Magnani, Gina Lollobrigida, or Sophia Loren? Gina Lollobrigida. Which actress was blacklisted from Hollywood after refusing to testify before HUAC in 1951? Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, or Gail Sondergaard? Gail Sondergaard. Which U.S. city officially desegregated its public schools in 1954 after the Brown versus Board of Education decision? Topeka, Kansas, Atlanta, Georgia, or Jackson, Mississippi? Topeka, Kansas. Which 1950s Hollywood actress was the voice of Lady in the film Lady and the Tramp? Audrey Hepburn, Doris Day, or Barbara Luddy? Barbara Luddy. Which Canadian city hosted the 50s edition of the British Empire and Commonwealth Games? Ottawa, Vancouver, or Montreal? Vancouver. The 1950s abstract expressionism movement began with the paintings of which artist? Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse, or Willem de Kooning? Willem de Kooning. Which Canadian Prime Minister oversaw the building of the St. Lawrence Seaway during the 1950s? Lester B. Pearson, Louis St. Laurent, or John Diefenbaker? Louis St. Laurent. Which 1950s deal had Canada and the U.S. jointly defend their airspace during the Cold War? The NORAD Agreement, the NATO Accord, or the Seattle Treaty? The NORAD Agreement. Which singer had a hit with 16 Tons in 1955? Johnny Cash, Tennessee Ernie Ford, or Hank Williams? Tennessee Ernie Ford. Which mountaineer was the first to reach the summit of Mount Everest alongside Tenzing Norgay in 1953? Jim Whittaker, Edmund Hillary, or Charles Houston? Edmund Hillary. Which Canadian city hosted the first ever NHL All-Star Game in 1951? Toronto, Montreal, or Ottawa? Toronto. Which European country introduced the famous Citroën DS automobile in 1955? France, Germany, or Italy? France. Which European city hosted the first World's Fair after World War II? Paris, Rome, or Brussels? Brussels. Which inventor created the black box flight recorder in the 1950s? Reginald Fessenden, David Warren, or Wilbur Franks? David Warren. Which American fast food chain opened its first franchise in 1952? Popeyes, McDonald's, or KFC? KFC. Which European designer is credited with the popularizing of the bubble dress in the late 50s? Balenciaga, Pierre Cardin, or Givenchy? Pierre Cardin. Which singer had a 1956 hit with Bebop Alula? Gene Vincent, Chuck Berry, or Buddy Holly? Gene Vincent. Which of these dollhouse furniture companies was first introduced in the 50s? Kidcraft, Hasbro, or Marx? Marx. Which political figure was nicknamed the Red Dean for his leftist views in 1950s Britain? Tony Benn, Michael Foot, or Hewlett Johnson? Hewlett Johnson. In what year did Swanson introduce the first officially marketed TV dinner? 1956, 1952, or 1953? 1953. Which French actress starred in And God Created Woman, which gave her international fame? Brigitte Bardot, Jean Moreau, or Simone Signoret? Brigitte Bardot. Which European country had a political crisis in 1956 after a failed uprising against Soviet influence? Poland, Czechoslovakia, or Hungary? Hungary. What was the #1 song on the Billboard charts in 1951? Too Young, How High the Moon, or Because of You? Too Young. Which British engineer designed the world's first successful hovercraft in 1955? John Logie Baird, Christopher Cockerell, or Frank Whittle? Christopher Cockerell. Which 1950s entertainment venues were also known as passion pits? Skating rinks, bowling alleys, or drive-in theaters? Drive-in theaters. Which Hollywood production facility was opened by CBS in 1952? Broadcast Plaza, Television Village, or Television City? Television City. Which Canadian province had an economic boom in the 1950s because of oil discoveries near Leduc? Alberta, Ontario, or British Columbia? Alberta. Which European city officially opened its rebuilt opera house in 1955 after wartime destruction? Berlin, Paris, or Vienna? Vienna. Which German-born scientist declined an offer to become the president of Israel in 1952? Werner Heisenberg, Albert Einstein, or Max Planck? Albert Einstein. Which author published On the Road in 1957? William S. Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, or Allen Ginsberg? Jack Kerouac. Which European city hosted the first Eurovision Song Contest in 1956? London, UK, Paris, France, or Lugano, Switzerland? Lugano, Switzerland. Which Scandinavian country introduced the Child Welfare Act in 1953? Norway, Sweden, or Denmark? Norway. Which French general returned to power in 1958 and established the Fifth Republic? Charles de Gaulle, Georges Pompidou, or François Mitterrand? Charles de Gaulle. Which youth culture novel was published by British author Colin MacInnes in 1959? Beginner's Goodbye, Youth Without Youth, or Absolute Beginners? Absolute Beginners. Who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1957 for illuminating the problems of the human conscience? Jean-Paul Sartre, André Malraux, or Albert Camus? Albert Camus. Which Belgian cartoonist comic character visited the moon in a book series started in the 50s? Hergé, Goscinny, or Uderzo? Hergé. Which French designer introduced the A-line dress silhouette in 1955? Chanel, Balmain, or Dior? Christian Dior. Which British colony achieved full independence in 1957 and became Ghana? The Gold Coast, Sierra Leone, or Nigeria? Gold Coast. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat in which American state? Alabama, Alaska, or Ohio? Alabama. Which motorcycle brand launched its Duo Glide model in 1958? Ducati, Yamaha, or Harley-Davidson? Harley-Davidson. Which company introduced the first mass-market portable transistor radio in 1954? Motorola, Texas Instruments, or Sony? Texas Instruments. Which Swedish liner collided with the Andrea Doria in 1956? MS Drottningholm, MS Gripsholm, or MS Stockholm? MS Stockholm. What was the average cost of a loaf of bread in Canada during the 1950s? 40 to 50 cents, 15 to 25 cents, or 5 to 10 cents? About 15 to 25 cents. In which European city was the European Coal and Steel Community established in 1951? Paris, London, or Berlin? Paris. What was the most common car color sold in the United States in 1950? Turquoise, red, or black? Black. What was the name of the robot in the 1956 sci-fi film Forbidden Planet? Robbie, Gort, or Robo? Robbie. Which Canadian designed jet interceptor first flew in 1950 and served during the Cold War? The CF-105 Arrow, the Canuck, or the Hornet? The CF-100 Canuck. What replaced the humans in the 1956 sci-fi movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Alien pods, robots, or mutant insects? Alien pods. Which shoe style became popular among teens in the 1950s? Brogues, creepers, or winkle pickers? Creepers. Which poet's 1955 reading at Sixth Gallery in San Francisco birthed the Beat generation? Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, or Allen Ginsberg? Allen Ginsberg. Which 1953 movie helped increase Vespa scooter sales worldwide? Roman Holiday, La Dolce Vita, or Summer in Rome? Roman Holiday. Who hosted the 1958 Canadian children's television show The Friendly Giant? Ernie Combs, Fred Rogers, or Bob Home? Bob Home. Which 1950 plan led to the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community? The Schuman Plan, Beveridge Plan, or the Pleven Plan? The Schuman Plan. What was the price of the first color television set that was sold in the U.S. in 1953? $495, $1,175, or $266? $1,175. Which luxury Swiss watch brand produced a model in 1952 that was specially designed for pilots? Omega, Long Island, or Breitling? Breitling. What was the original purpose behind the creation of the 1950s radio serial The Archers? Sharing farm gossip, educating farmers, or marketing new fertilizers? Educating farmers. The 1958 horror film The Blob showed a creature made of what real-world material? Silicone, latex, or jello? Silicone. Which 1950s Hollywood actress wore a potato sack dress as a publicity stunt? Jane Mansfield, Ava Gardner, or Marilyn Monroe? Marilyn Monroe. What new musical genre originated in Jamaica in the 1950s and blended jazz and Caribbean folk rhythms? Ska, reggae, or calypso? Ska. Which 1950s pop singer's first record was a cover of That's All Right Mama? Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, or Little Richard? Elvis Presley. What was the average price of a brand new car in the United States in 1955? $2,400, $5,200, or $3,600? $2,400. What was the name of Jacques Cousteau's research vessel that launched in 1950? Challenger, Calypso, or Nautilus? Calypso. Which airlines started their tourist class in the 1950s, making air travel affordable for more people? BOAC, Pan Am, or KLM? KLM. Which luxury French ocean liner launched in the 50s and was famous for its Art Deco interiors? The Liberté, the France, or the Normandy? The SS Normandy. What was the average price of a dozen eggs in the US in 1952? 67 cents, 55 cents, or 85 cents? $0.67. In what year did the Riviera open in Las Vegas? 1946, 1963, or 1955? 1955. Which American food brand invented frozen waffles in 1953? Pillsbury, Eggo, or Aunt Jemima? Eggo. Which German company invented the electric shaver in the early 1950s? Braun, Philips, or Siemens? Braun. In 1956, which U.S. state built the first section of what would become the interstate highway system? Ohio, Missouri, or California? Missouri. What type of architecture became popular in the 1950s in the California suburbs? Modernist, Victorian Revival, or Colonial Gothic? Modernist. What U.S. Animal Protection Act was introduced by Eisenhower because of public pressure in 1958? the Animal Welfare Act, Endangered Species Act, or the Humane Slaughter Act? The Humane Slaughter Act. Which country introduced the world's first nuclear-powered merchant ship in the 1950s? The United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, or the United States? The United States. In 1953, the last execution in Canada occurred in which city? Toronto, Montreal, or Calgary? Montreal. Which outdoor gear brand was founded in Sweden in 1950? Fjällräven, Helly Hansen, or the North Face? Fjällräven. Which U.S. state became the first to require seatbelts in all new cars starting in 1955? Texas, New York, or California? California. In what area was Switzerland's first motorway opened in 1955? Lucerne, Zurich, or Bern? Lucerne. Which North Atlantic island allowed the U.S. to construct the Keflavik Air Base in the early 1950s? Greenland, Faroe Islands, or Iceland? Iceland. What dog breed was a pet at the White House during President Eisenhower's term? A beagle, a dachshund, or a Weimaraner? Weimaraner. Which engineer invented the automatic pedestrian walk-don't-walk signs in 1952? William Phelps Eno, Lewis Latimer, or Garrett Morgan? William Phelps Eno. Which 1950s film is credited with giving the Japanese film industry international recognition? Rashomon, Seven Samurai, or Tokyo Story? Rashomon. Which jazz singer recorded her famous Lady in Satin album in 1958? Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, or Sarah Vaughan? Billie Holiday. Who was called the French Elvis after bringing rock and roll to France in the late 50s? Sergei Gainsbourg, Charles Aznavour, or Johnny Hallyday? Johnny Hallyday. Which book about American corporate culture was published by William H. White? The Lonely Crowd, The Organization Man, or The Corporate Ladder? The Organization Man. Which singer was called the King of Soul during the 1950s? Fats Domino, James Brown, or Sam Cooke? Sam Cooke. Which 1950s U.S. college basketball scandal involved point shaving? Ivy League bribery, Big Ten betting, or the CCNY scandal? The CCNY scandal. What was the name of the golfer who won 3 major championships in a single year in 1953? Ben Hogan, Sam Snead, or Byron Nelson? Ben Hogan. Bonus question. The nickname given to the 1958 NFL Championship game was what? Let us know the answer in the comments and how well you did with our quiz class Einstein Rewards. Thanks for playing, and we will see you next time.